Hello everyone, today we are going to learn how to create a pant in Clo. We're going to follow the process of adding in our avatar, our Clo avatar, organizing our patterns, and then adding the details to complete this pant. So let's go into it. The first step when starting this is of course to load in our avatar and load in our pattern pieces. So here I have a file which is called library pants, and I'm going to add in my avatar first. Here I'm adding in a male avatar. I'm simply double clicking and your avatar will be imported into your window. Next, I'm going to add in the DXF pattern I already have present here. Simple add into my workspace. And here I have my patterns in the 2D and 3D window. Now that all the patterns are in my window, I'm going to begin arranging these patterns so that this makes it a little easier for me to sew. Starting of course with the front and back here. I'm also going to arrange the pockets here on top. And then lastly, my waistband. Here I have matched the pattern so I can work with sewing quite easily. So let's begin our sewing. During any sort of sewing, it is better to sew the larger part first. And over here, I am going to use free sewing. Once I select my free sewing tool, I'm going to start sewing the sides. As you can see over here in this pattern, there is a notch and you have to fit the notches together to sew it. This small part is going to turn back, so I will sew it only from here to the end. Now I'm going to go ahead and click the M to N free sewing tool. And I'm going to use this tool to sew this side. In the case of M to N sewing, the order is very important. Both sides of the M to N will come from the top to the bottom. So I begin from the start over here. And once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Once you press enter, you will be instructed to start the free sewing of the end side. So there I am completing the end side of the sewing. Starting with that part of the pocket and then this part over here. Once this is completed, I will press enter again and the sewing for M to N will be completed. I'm going to continue sewing the other parts as well. As you can see, I'm placing that pattern right on top of it, so it's easy to understand where each part has to get sewn. This part will be my pocket, so I'm sewing the sides together. Here it is important to note that since the pocket bag will be flat against the front pattern, we will have to change the sewing line type. As you can see over here, we're going to learn all about the sewing line types. Whenever you do a normal sewing, you can see it will be shown as the first option, that is flat. Over here, whenever our basic default sewing is done, it always gets sewn as flat. But what we are looking for in the pocket, since the pocket bag will be right behind the front pattern, we want the pocket bag and the front pattern sewing line to be turned. So here you can see we have the sewing line type. And in the property editor, you can see there is the option of sewing line time, which I am just changing to turned. Here again for reference, you can see when it is changed to turned, both the pattern pieces will lie flat one on top of the other. So in this case, our pocket bag will lie flat right behind the front pattern. So for any such sort of a pattern, you have to change the sewing line type to turned. Now I am just going to go ahead and continue the rest of the sewing. Again, using my free sewing tool, I'm sewing from top to bottom. Over here, like before, I'm leaving that slight space at the hem because that will be turned. Go ahead and complete the rest of the sewing. Once this is done, we are now going to focus on the pocket. As you can see, this pocket bag pattern is on fold. So I'm going to sew both the sides, and over here again, I will change the sewing line type to turn. You will understand this a lot more when we place these patterns around the avatar. Once all of this is done, we are going to duplicate the patterns and then sew the waistband. What I'm doing here is now I'm going to use the transform pattern tool, and I'm going to select the patterns that I want to duplicate. Once you have selected all the patterns that you want to duplicate, you simply right click. And over here you have the option for symmetric pattern with sewing, that is the shortcut of Ctrl+D. Once this happens, you will have the shadow of the other side of your patterns and you simply click. I'm bringing the back patterns together so that this helps with the sewing once again. I'm making sure the patterns are arranged in the 3D window as they are in the 2D. And now I'm going to continue the sewing. Here I have the fly, which I am sewing. Once this part is done, you can see the other side of the pattern edge of the fly needs to be sewn to this line. But right now on the pattern, it is a baseline and we cannot sew anything to a baseline. So I'm going to have to convert it to an internal line. To do that, I'm using the trace tool and I'm simply going to click on these baselines. The baseline is divided into a number of different lines, so I'm simply keeping shift pressed and clicking on it. Once this is done, I press the enter button on the keyboard and this will turn the line into a red. That means it's turned into an internal line. Now I can go ahead and sew this part. Once this is done, you can see as per default, the sewing line type will be turned. This is because whenever you sew a pattern outline to an internal line, the sewing line will always show as turned. Now I'm completing the sewing and you can see here I'm going to turn this as well. Once this is done, I have a few more sewing lines to complete on the back. Now we are going to work on this fly pattern. So to complete the rest of this pattern, I'm going to copy this fly pattern, and to do so, I'm simply right-clicking, choosing the option copy, and right-click anywhere in the 2D window and paste this pattern. This construction will become clearer to you when we do the arrangement of all of these patterns. I'm then sewing this one side, and this part of my fly is now complete. Now we have the waistband part that is yet to be completed. Over here you can see that this denotes the center back of the waistband. So I'm going to start the sewing from there and do the back first. Here I have one side of the back completed, then the other. And you will also get the dark blue dots to tell you the sewing line length. Now I'm going to complete the front. The front here is going to be a little bit tricky because we have the pocket and the front pattern. So I'm selecting M to N sewing. First I select the waistband sewing and I'm pressing enter to complete the M sewing. Now to complete the N sewing, I have to select part of the pocket and then the waistband. So here I'm selecting one part of the pocket and then finish it off with the waistband and press enter. Once this is done, I have one side of my front completed and I'm going to replicate it to the other side. Same process on the other side. Using M to N, I select the waistband and press enter. And over here now, I'm going to select the pocket, the front pattern, and we are also going to select the fly pattern that we copied over here. Once this is done, you go ahead and press enter. Again, this will become much more clearer when we arrange the patterns. Once this is done, I'm going to go on to free sewing. And in free sewing, I'm sewing this part of the pocket to the front pattern. Again, we are changing it to turned since the pocket bag will be sitting right behind the front pattern. As you can see, I don't have to do the sewing twice because it will be duplicated on the other side since both of them are symmetric patterns. Now I have these pocket patterns that I have not yet sewn, and I'm going to select them and deactivate the pocket and the loop patterns. So right click and we have the option deactivate pattern only. I will be deactivating these patterns because I am not sewing them right now. I'm going to finish the basic pant patterns and then I will get on to sewing them. I'm also going to select the reset 2D arrangement just so that all my patterns are set in the same way as my 2D window in my 3D window. Now we're going to work on arranging the pattern pieces around our avatar. So the first thing that we're going to do over here is that all of these pattern pieces are right now in front of the avatar, and we're going to keep them a little bit away so we can work on it. And before that, we're going to go ahead and switch on our arrangement points. This will help us arrange our pattern pieces around our avatar with ease. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these patterns and I'm going to move them up with the help of my gizmo tool. Once that's done and all the patterns are out of your way, I'm using the number 2 on my keyboard, which is the shortcut for the front view of the avatar. And I'm going to select the front pant pattern and place it over there with my arrangement points. Now I'm using the number key 8 for the back view. And I'm doing the same, but I'm keeping shift pressed to select both the back patterns. Next we have our waistband. So here again, placing the waistband along here. Now I've placed the pocket, and once the pocket is placed, since I need the pocket to be behind, I'm looking at the property editor section that says arrangement, and I'm going to change the offset so that my pant pattern is towards the front. Lastly, we need to fold this pattern piece of the pocket. So I'm using the trace tool and selecting that line and pressing enter to create it into an internal line. Once that's done, we're using the fold arrangement tool to fold the pocket. So you simply select it, and once you get the gizmo tool, you can move that and fold the pocket like so. Once this is done, we need to place the fly patterns. So I'm going to right click on the fly pattern in the 3D window, and you have the option to superimpose under. When I choose the option to superimpose under, you will see that the fly pattern will be right behind the front pant pattern. So this will help with the arrangement. Next, I'm going to superimpose side for this other pattern. Here with the gizmo tool, I'm just bringing it out. And over here, I'm also going to complete the sewing this side. So you can see all the sewing lines as well. This pattern might also be a little stretched out, but that is because it is also sewn to the top waistband, and the superimpose is dependent on the sewing. Here I'm also changing the offset of the waistband. This will help in the simulation. I am going to sew this part of the waistband here. So I'm using the trace tool to create that into an internal line. And now I'm going to sew the edges of the waistband together. This will help with the simulation process as well. Lastly, I'm moving the pockets below. Now let's adjust the garment in the simulation once it's complete. So I'm going to switch on simulation by pressing the spacebar on my keyboard, and you can see the garment has simulated. There's one part of the sewing that is incomplete, so I'm going to do that right now. Once this is done, just simulate again. You can see there's a slight collision happening over here, so I'm simply going to bring the front pant pattern ahead. And I'm pressing the 2 key on my keyboard to get the front view, and I'm selecting all the patterns, and with the gizmo tool I'm going to move them a little higher so the waistband sits at the correct position. Once simulation is done, you can see the waistband is sitting much better. Now we're going to work on the hem of the pant. To work on the hem of the pant, I need an internal line that is the exact distance from the hem on the top so I can create a fold. To do that, I'm going to use the Edit Pattern tool. And when I right click, I get the option Offset as an internal line. I'm going to use that right now and create an internal line that is the same distance from that hem. As you can see here, you have a line. I'm going to sew it. And now with the fold arrangement tool, I can fold it to create my hem. I'm also going to sew the sides. I'm doing this with the free sewing tool, and I'm making sure to change the seam line type to turned. Since they will be folding, it will be right against each other, which is why we set the seam line type to turned. I'm following the same process on the other side of the pant as well. This is on the back. And don't forget to change the seam line type to turned for the edges. Once this is done, I'm using the fold arrangement tool to fold them to the inside. Once this is done, you can go ahead and simulate and you have your hem done. Now let's work on the pocket. To make sure my pocket is adjusted properly, I'm hiding the 3D pattern, that is the front pant pattern. Now while keeping simulation on, I'm just pulling this to make sure the pocket is simulated correctly. Now selecting the pant pattern in the 2D window, you will get the gizmo in the 3D. Once I right click on it, it will give me the option to show the 3D pattern again. This will make sure my pocket is simulated correctly and there is no collision on it. I'm now going to strengthen all of these patterns just to make sure there's no collision and the pant is fitted correctly. This is a good trick to use if you feel that there is some collision that you cannot see. And now I'm going to unstrengthen it. Now we're going to start with these small pocket patterns and the loop pattern that we had deactivated earlier. I'm activating them right now. Over here, it is important to note where the patterns need to be placed. On the front, you can see the pocket pattern needs to be placed between two other patterns, and on the back, it needs to be placed on top of the back pant pattern. Here I am going to now change the baselines into internal lines so that I can sew my pockets over here. I'm going to use my trace tool and keeping shift pressed, I'm selecting the outline of this pocket. After that, I will press enter to convert it to an internal line. Once this is done, we're going to go ahead and sew the pocket. I'm using the free sewing tool over here. We're going to do the same to the back pocket. I'm using the trace tool, and while keeping shift pressed, I'm selecting the outer baselines that will form my pocket. I'm then going to press enter to convert it to an internal line. And now I'm going to use the free sewing tool to go ahead and sew up the pocket. You can see that since I have sewn one pocket, the other will automatically get sewn because they're symmetrical. Now I'm selecting these pockets and I'm using the shortcut of superimpose over. Since this pocket pattern is going to be placed between two patterns, I'm selecting the front pant pattern and with the gizmo tool, slightly bringing it out. The back pocket is fine as it is. Once this is done, we switch on simulation and check if it has simulated correctly. Now we're going to work on the loops of the pant. For this, you can see that one side is going to be attached to the pattern outline and the other side, as usual, is on a baseline. I'm using the trace tool, pressing enter to convert it to an internal line, and the same for the back. Since the patterns are symmetrical, you will have to do it only for one side. Now we are going to go ahead and start sewing these loops. Since we have only one loop pattern, we are going to need to copy and paste it to create more. For that, I'm using Ctrl C and then Ctrl V and right clicking to get this pop-up box to select the amount of loops I want to create. Now that we have all the loop patterns created, we're going to go ahead and start sewing them. I'm using the free sewing tool here, sewing the top part to the belt first and then to its corresponding part on the pant. Always make sure to use the sewing tool first on the belt loops and then on the belt pattern or the pant pattern. This will give you the dark blue dot that will tell you the exact measurement of sewing that you have completed. Now that all the sewing is completed, I'm selecting all the pant loops, and here I've shown the mesh of the loop, and you can see since it's a small pattern, a 20 particle distance is too much. So what we are going to do is we're going to select all of these belt loop patterns, and I'm going to change the particle distance to 5. This will help in simulation as well. Now with all the pattern loops selected, I'm going to use superimpose over, and you can see they will be placed according to the sewing lines. Once simulation is on, you can see the pattern loops are placed correctly. Now we're going to work into applying our fabric and changing our avatar pose. The first thing that we can do is change the pose, and in library avatar section, you'll see there's a folder called pose. If you click on it, you'll see that there are a number of poses, and when you double click, you'll get the option to add the pose to the existing avatar. Here I've changed the avatar pose so the hands come lower. And now we're going to add in a fabric. I already have a denim fabric here, which I'm simply going to drag and drop. And you can see now that the denim fabric has been applied to my pant. I'm selecting the belt and the belt loops. And here in the property editor, I'm looking for the option for adding bond to this belt pattern. Here we have the option of bond, which I'm going to tick so it switches on. And now I'm selecting all the patterns and simulating the pant again while using the gizmo tool to lift it up. Now we're going to work on the top stitches and the trims. Here I'm making sure my baselines and internal lines are not visible anymore. And you can see here that there are a number of top stitches in this render, which I am also going to add into our pant. Here I'm using the top stitch tool, and I'm going to use the section of free top stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and add top stitches to my pocket. As soon as I complete it, you can see there's a white top stitch added. I'm going to change this default white top stitch and make it more suitable for a denim. So here I'm changing the SPI. I'm also going to go ahead and change the color. And I'm increasing the number of top stitch lines to 2. Now I'm adding top stitch to the back band. And the front pocket section. Now to the front pant pattern, the side seam. Now I'm going ahead and adding top stitches to the belt pattern as well as the belt loops. To add it to a complete shape on all 4 sides, you just need to double click on one of the corners of the pattern, as I am doing here. Now we're going to add in top stitch to the hem. And we also need to add top stitch to the fly. Over here, since the patterns are symmetrical, as soon as I add top stitch to one side, it will be replicated to the other. So for that, we need to take off the symmetry between both the patterns. I am simply selecting both the patterns, and on right-clicking in the 2D window, we get the option to remove linked editing. Now both the patterns will not be symmetrical, so when I add in top stitch to one pattern, it won't be replicated on the other. I'm using the edit top stitch to delete both the top stitches, and now with the free top stitch, I've added to only one side of the pattern. We need to follow the same process here at the back. So I'm clicking on them, right click, remove linked editing, and now adding the top stitch here. Once this is done, we now lastly need to add the button and the buttonhole. To do that, we have the baseline, that is the guideline markers here. So I'm going to use here my buttonhole tool, and I simply need to left click once to add in my buttonhole. I'm going to do the same for the other side of the belt and add in my button with my button tool. Here we have the default button and buttonhole added, and now I'm going to fasten the button. Simply using the fasten button tool, I click once, drag and click it to the buttonhole. And now my button is fastened. I'm selecting the button and I'm changing the default button to another one. Here we have a basic Clo default library, so you can go ahead and customize your button as you like. I'm also changing the fabric to metal, and I'm going to go ahead and change the color. Once I'm happy with the color, I can simply click OK. I'm also customizing the buttonhole. And now that this is done, we need to add rivets to the pocket over here on the front. So I'm going to add in a button here, that is a default button. And I'm going to add those here on my pocket. Of course, I'm going to customize this to create the rivets. And I'm making sure the size is small. Changing it to metal, that is a metallic fabric, and changing the color to the same color that I used on the center front button. Once I've added all the buttons I need to, I'm making sure the fabric that I can see in my 3D window is double-sided. That is a thick textured surface. And I'm now selecting the belt and the belt loops, and I'm increasing the thickness render to 1. This will make my fabric a little thicker. Now let's work on enhancing the quality of this garment. To do so, we are going to use a high-res garment option, which essentially will decrease the particle distance and it will change the additional thickness collision. You can also see the options of skin offset that will be changed here as well. This will essentially make your garment a high-resolution garment. Once you select OK, you will see your simulation will change over here, and it will simulate according to the actual fabric properties. Once this is done, you will have a high-res denim garment ready. Here you can view it in the render window. Hope this tutorial was helpful. Thank you everyone.